Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen, and my channel is all about creating content that empowers the neurodiverse and disabled community. Have you ever wondered how to promote more agency and independence with your neurodivergent child? Well, in this episode, I welcome back Deborah Winking, author of Capable, educator, and mother of a child with a genetic syndrome. She covers 3 more habits that she promotes with her clients to create environments where neurodivergent children can thrive. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to welcome back Deborah Winking, author of Capable, educator, and more importantly, or the most importantly, the parent of a disabled kiddo. Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
No, I just said most importantly. You're right.
Most importantly, a parent of a disabled kiddo. I just feel like the parent role is not only does it give us street cred in so many ways, but it's one of the most important roles and jobs we have on this planet. And so, so I just feel like that's the most important credential, I think.
Yeah, that's the top line. I thought about it too, because I did so much work in my career. It was all about educators, and it was all about preparing educators. And then I kind of screwed my head on differently and said, yeah, but we educators are with our students 5.5, 6 hours a day tops. But parents are truly the most influential person in their child's life. As much as we want to say, technology and social media is contravening that, the truth is parents are the most influential. And that's why I think it's the right focus.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's like, I really feel like it's in all the little moments. It's all the little moments that glue things together, that I think that's where like parents are very influential. And I struggle against this just personally as a parent of a teenager right now, that balance of like fostering and promoting autonomy and agency, which is like really something that I feel so strongly about professionally. And what that results in is an independent, autonomous, hopefully, young person with a good head on their shoulders. But that means they need you less.
And that means they're not always going to do the things that you wished or hoped or wanted for them. Yeah, and that is perennial and since the beginning of time, and it's regardless of whether your child is neurodiverse or neurotypical. And the fact is we get to parent our children for a season, and then they are their own people.
Yes.
But what I have learned is what we do during that season really matters. So
Exactly. And, so Deb, thanks for coming back onto the show. Last time you came on, and I will put that card, I'll link that interview or that episode up above. For those of you that are listening, in your audio ears only, that will be linked as well. We were going over the habits that you really cover in your book, Capable, or based actually on your book, Capable. And those were one, believe, and actually, why don't you do them, Deb? Your first 3 habits that we reviewed in the last episode were.
Sure, yeah. So basically, you're right. Capable is my story. My story is not everyone's story, and it's not the only story. However, it gave way to this sort of inquiry around, hey, what are the habits? I didn't do it all right, but what are the habits shared across the board by parents who are raising their kid as capable, regardless of the challenges they face? And so I started investigating these habits, and that's what we began to get into last time. So just those first 3, do you want me to flip them up on the screen, or do you want
to flip them up on the screen? Let's do it.
All right, we're going to give this a shot. Let's see. Are you showing it right now?
Yeah, you're up.
Thank you. I just need to technology. So, first three, we started out with that belief that effort creates potential. And this is kind of like this sine qua non that underlies all. We have to believe that our potential is fixed and that effort can trump, in many cases, even the best diagnostic predictions. Okay. And for our kids, effort may require different or additional supports and scaffolds, but still that potential is not fixed. And then holding on to that belief and allowing it to guide you in all the decisions that you make with your child. So that was one. Secondly, was setting that capable vision with your child and adjusting it as necessary. And this one, we got into it last time, and it gets a little sticky because there's all these folks that say, oh, expectations are a trap. Expectations, just lead you to disappointment. But what I found throughout hundreds of interviews is that the truth is that every parent raising a capable kid has some kind of vision. And I want to define that because last time we're like vision, notion, imagining, dream. And I want to define that for us and say, when we say vision, we're talking about a shared belief with you and your child about your child's future, which is informed and shaped by their interests, motivations, proclivities, and passions, and your own hopes for your child. And the idea is that vision is flexible and evolves with context. It's concrete and intentional, and it actually becomes the litmus test for how you say yes or no, or how much of a certain service or support or opportunity or all the choices that come your child's way. So that's number two. And number three is put that diagnosis in its place. Your kid is a kid first. And the idea then is that, and we talked about this, you and I, about how diagnosis provides information, and you want to use the heck out of that diagnosis for the supports and services that it'll offer, but never allow it to limit your child. And don't allow yourself to fall into the trap of overly weighting those characteristics of your child's diagnosis. Because I have found, and I've seen this over and over, if you spend all your time expecting them, you run the risk of manifesting them. So those are the first three.
Yeah, it's such great 3 habits to really frame. And habits, I think for you are like something you do consistently, in other words, right?
Yeah.
These are attitudes and beliefs that are being demonstrated and thought about consistently. Okay. So Deb, you came back on the show today to do the next 3 habits, which means, because there's more than 6, which means I get to get you back on the show again. But habits 4, 5, and 6. So why don't we go to the 4th habit? Because this one as a psychologist is like really, I think in my mind, so important and so helpful.
I really want you to weigh in deeply on this, Gwen, because this is one I'm still researching. I feel very strongly about it. I feel that we could do an entire show on this habit alone because fear is such a biggie, but let's talk about it. So name your fears and tame them to allow your child to pursue their best life. So with this one, my favorite, there's a musician named Zach Williams, and my favorite song of his is "Fear She Is a Liar," and I feel like that rings so true in us as parents because we always want the very best for our child, and when fear, even though sometimes fear will trick us into behavior patterns that don't allow us to do the best with and for our child because of that fear. So fear kind of tricks us. Fear is kind of a liar about what is really true in our lives. So the idea behind this habit is that first of all, just recognizing that fear is hardwired in all of us as parents. You know this as a parent. We all know this. We have such a deep, you know, biological attachment to our children that we feel their fears very viscerally ourselves. We also, on our own, bring our own baggage to our parenting. So it's this, when we parent, we're in this stew of our own fears, our own concerns, our own trauma, our own PTSD that we bring from our own lives. And then we bring that into our parenting. And so what I've found is that unnamed fears can really lead to unhelpful behavior patterns that affect how we can help our kids pursue their best life. So I'm going to take a pause there for you to ask some questions, because after this, I want to talk about how we can tame them.
Yeah, I really feel like Dr. Dan Siegel, who does so much
Yes.
beautiful mindfulness work, really talks about, name it to tame it, right? The idea of knowing your emotions. And emotions, I think emotions have a really sneaky way of being attended to and seen. I always say they're pesky. If you ignore them, they keep tapping you on the shoulder until, they'll throw a tantrum for you to see them. And you're right. Fears are hardwired, and we are really wired to avoid and protect when we're fearful of something. It's just that, we're wired to protect ourselves against the big scary bads, that are life-threatening. And some of the things that we're scared about or fearful about when it comes to parenting, I think, are not life-threatening. And so we have to separate them in order to know that. And I just love acknowledging and calling it, naming, just acknowledging this. I'm really scared about this and making a good I statement about it,
Well,
and
just,
yeah,
and like you said, some of our fear is biological. We need it. It's important. We get,
yeah,
we get run over by a bus, but I think we've been talking from the beginning on this pod about intentionality. It's, unless we are intentional and identify them, they can really mess with our parenting, right? So
yeah, we're
that's
not
why
making decisions, right? Like when we're fearful, and that's a hind brain, bottom brained kind of thing, right? Emotion brain, right? We're not wise minded, as when you like DBT or those other some other of the other theoretical kind of orientations, but that idea of I'm not really thinking and making a conscientious decision here. I'm actually
right.
reflexively doing something because of fear. And I find that fear is probably one of the biggest barriers to facilitating autonomy in a young person.
Absolutely.
As speaking as a mom of a teenager today, there are so many fears that I have in our world that I didn't face when I was a teenager. And they really scare me. And that could really, I think, lead me to putting her in a protective bubble suit and never letting her leave my home, which obviously is, it's the obvious wrong move for people, right? Like you don't need to be a psychologist to understand that that would be detrimental, not only for her development, but for my relationship with her. um,
Exactly.
so the idea here, though, is to move in with conscientiousness and to trust what you can trust, know what know where you can let go of things. And the only way you know to let go of things is when you see it consistently. So this is just one of those things. I just love that you have this really as it's a section in and of itself.
It's got to be. It's got
Got
to
to
be.
be. Got to be.
If we have a minute, I just want to list for you, because I think it really shows how fear plays in the laundry list of fears that parents I've been interviewing, and myself, the parent of a child born with a genetic syndrome, can fear. So can I just like list a
Yeah.
few, just so we can see
Yeah.
that circle of fear even constricts more with our kids who have somehow been identified as not cutting the mustard based on some diagnosis or label. So here's an example of just a few. Fear about getting advice and commentary from people who just don't know your child. Fear that my child will be considered some kind of a threat. Fear that my child's behavior will be another strike against whatever that population is. Let's say people with ASD, a class of people that people are already quick to stereotype. I fear that I won't be able to handle it as a parent, that I'm not good enough. I fear that my child won't be accepted, and by extension, that I won't be accepted. That's that FOMO, that fear of being left out, fear of being pitied or judged, fear of being embarrassed or humiliated, fear of failure or disappointment, fear of standing out because your child moves or walks or behaves differently. Fear that you're not doing enough. There's always another therapy out there that you might be neglecting. Fear that you're doing too many therapies and that you're pushing your child too hard. Fear that he'll miss out on something if you don't push him harder. Fear that in caring for this child with extra needs, I'll neglect my other kids who are neurotypical. Fear that other kids in my family are missing out as I prioritize this child. Fear that he'll a generalized fear of the future. Where will he go? What will he do when I'm gone? Fear of transitions, each transition. What if the services in place in the next place are not as good as what we have now? And frankly, I don't want to leave out fear for some of our kiddos with intensive medical needs.
Yeah.
That we'll lose them altogether, that our time with them will be cut short. So that's just some. So those are the kinds of things that might be running through each of our minds as we're working with our child with a disability.
Yeah.
And that is not a short list.
No, I mean, and that's not even the tip, I think, of the iceberg, right? Like that, and I think what's so challenging is this kind of cast of self-doubt, and what fear can do in regards to really eating away or contaminating your self-doubt. And I think as a parent, not feeling efficacious, not feeling like you can do things for your kids easily and effectively, that's interesting. Like these are all psychological pieces that it's not a lion or a tiger lurking in the corner to attack you, but man, it sure probably feels like that inside your mind,
But it's just as fierce. Yeah, it's just as fierce.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think unnamed fears can lead. I think one of the most important thing is not naming our fears can lead to what I call unhelpful behavior patterns with our kid. If I haven't identified that fear and if I don't see it when it rears its head, it can lead to behavior patterns. If those behavior patterns are repeat. Now look, that's why one of our habits is, hey, be patient with yourself. We're all going to make mistakes. So, making mistakes is what we do. That's okay. But what I do want to point out is that if we engage in these kind of unhelpful behavior patterns over the course of a lifetime, it can affect how our child is able to pursue their best life. So that's why we want to pay attention to them. So, so if I can, I just want to say that number one, unnamed fears, we can pass those same fears on to our child. I mean, look, we all do this. I can tell you that my kid's fear of peanut butter is my fear. I pass it on. I don't like peanut butter. It has nothing to do with any allergies. I just don't like it. Pass that fear on. So some of them are really innocuous. No, just kind of aren't going to affect anything kind of fears. But also we can pass fears that are really limiting onto our child. Over the course of a childhood, these behavior patterns can get in the way. And I'm going to give you about just 6 ways that unexamined fears can get in the way if they become a behavior pattern that persists. So fear can cause us to put fixed limitations on our child. Oh, he can only do this much. Oh, he can only handle this much. those kind of fixed limitations can get in the way of our kid exploring. Fear can cause us to hunker down. Now, listen, this is one that you and I talk about all the time, but fear can cause us to hunker down and really get in the bunker of our comfort zone. And we talked
Mm-hmm.
last time about, yes, our kids need, and I love how you say this, long runways and soft landings. But we also talked about that a fact of human existence is we change. Every organism on this planet changes because of discomfort. The challenge is to allow that discomfort with support so that we change. And what happens with fear sometimes is we can kind of get in that bunker of our comfort zone and not get out of it in ways that are supported, which would allow our child to grow. Oh, for example, oh, he can't do this, he can't do that. I worked with a child one time who said, my son only responds to his regular one-on-one aid, and we can't have any aid with him ever. It needs to be this person. And who knows? Not allowing that child to experience a different instructional aid may keep him from being flexible with other people over time, may keep him from interacting with people he doesn't know so well. So that idea that our fears can cause us to kind of put a bright line around that comfort zone where we can't even venture out of it with support. Fear can cause us to opt out of possibilities and opportunities if they present themselves. Like I actually was mom friends with another mom when my kid was young, and she would say, "Oh yeah, no, I turned down that birthday party invitation. I turn them down because I know there's going to be dyes in the cake, and it just sets off my kid." So that fear can cause some opting out. That who knows what could have happened. It can cause us to overprotect our child in ways that can be dangerous. I don't take my kid to the after school program because those kids are just too rough there. I've worked with many a child that once they got out there and were with other kids, those other kids embraced them and they made new friends they would have never had. And then, like we said before, it can cause you to buy into each and every prediction or indication of your child's diagnosis to the point that you're looking to find them. And when you see them, it's confirmation bias. Oh, yeah, I thought that was going to happen. And this last unhelpful behavior pattern is one that I fell into. It can cause you to get irritable, angry, and anxious with your child because of your own fears. Not my proudest parenting moment at all, but I will share it with you. I remember going postal on my child because, and I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but he came out of the bathroom with his fingers in his mouth, and I said, "Oh my God, get your fingers out of your mouth. If you don't, they're going to put you in that self-contained classroom, and I just can't handle that." So there I let my fears really take me to a place that I didn't want to be as a parent. So those are just some examples that, those are just some ways that unexamined fears can lead to behavior patterns that you could imagine that if you turn down every birthday party invitation, if you really bought into some fixed limitations for your child, if you decided that you were going to hunker down and kind of get into your bunker so that nothing could kind of get in the way, kind of the idea of that protective bubble or that Michelin man suit you want to put your daughter in, that those, if you didn't stop yourself, could really get in the way of your kid pursuing their best life. So that's why it's important to name them.
Yeah. I love that idea of kind of like that fixed limitations, because something that I do with my clients and their parents, if I'm working with their parents as well, is, we don't just do a pro-con list on making a decision. We do a pro-con list on not making the decision.
Ooh, I love it.
And, that can also highlight, what we might be missing here out of the opportunity. And I think that this is a situation where we're talking about net gains. And whenever we talk about net gains, and it's not so black and white, it's not so absolute, that these are where the difficult decisions lie. And that sometimes you do need to do a little something that makes you a little fearful. It's kind of calculated risks to see
Calculated.
and to give kids opportunities to grow, because that's the only way that they do, is to do. I always say, let your kiddo live their decision. But whatever you're exposing them to, make sure that it's within the realm of reach. It's a
Mm-hmm.
stretch, not a drop off a cliff. Like those two things are very different. But I love it. I love this. This is great.
Can I just comment on something you just said? The thing you said
Sure.
about let them live their decision, that comes up
Hmm.
later in our habits. And I think your point there is such a good one, because really remember that is integral to dignity as a
Yeah.
person. One of the
Yeah.
things that bothers me the most about our population of young adults, I'm talking about children here, but young adults and adults with special needs, is oftentimes they don't get that the dignity that is afforded to all of us on the planet when we get to experience the consequences of our decisions.
Yeah.
And without that, we don't learn how to regulate our behavior. Most parents that I talk to, if they're having a very difficult time parenting behaviors of their child with special needs, it's because they're not allowing their child with a disability to experience the consequences of their decisions. And we
Yeah.
do it with our neurotypical kids, and I'll have it even a family. The neurotypical kids will be, rightly torqued off because there's consequences for their behavior, but there's not consequences for the behavior of their brother or sister who happens to be neurodivergent or have a disability. So important if we think we're, when we think we're sparing our kid the consequence of his decisions, we're really getting in the way of them having the full dignity that we afford to all people. So,
Yep. Yep. And I think what we're saying is, like, be mindful of exposure. We're not saying push them off a cliff, like, and
right.
in order to understand that, you do need to have a good sense of who your kiddo is, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can expose them to that next level, and not not an entire situation where they're not going to be able to handle that. That's just not going to go well. And that's going to talk about confirmation bias. That's definitely going to confirm your bias that they're not able to do X, whatever that X might be. But this is where I feel like there's some guidance. Sometimes it's really helpful for guidance here, helping a parent craft or figure out a level of exposure to certain things that makes sense given their kiddo's profile at the time. I think the other thing that happens that I see is when we don't offer opportunities and we make decisions. In other words, we control or make decisions completely for our children, no matter if they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. The only thing that comes out of that is resentment.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's just, and that can get in the way, right? That gets in the way of seeing yourself. That gets in the, you want your kiddo to see themselves and take accountability for their actions. But if you're constantly doing that, then they'll have a reason to resent you and they won't look at themselves. And so this is highly complicated. So we're not saying this is easy at all. It's just something to think about.
No, it is complicated, but now I want you to push back
Hmm.
on me here, Gwen. But this is how I talk about the best ways to put your fear in its place. And now
Mm.
push back on me, but I think these are the steps, and maybe we can hone or craft these even further. But this is where what I've seen and what I've advised. So number one, admit we are all fearful. Hey,
Hmm.
It is the water we swim in. And if you look at another parent and think they aren't fearful, then they're not telling the truth, right? So first admit we are all fearful, then take up what we just said, which is take the time to really name our fears. What am I afraid of? I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of embarrassment. What is it? And then after that, remind ourselves of what we talked about back in habit number 2, our vision with our child. What is our capable vision? And use that to keep our child front and center. Because I promise, if you keep your child front and center, you'll tamp down your fear. Example. Here's an example. So let's say you said, I'm really, I personally bring some baggage to the table that this is an example. I'm an introvert and I don't like to stand out. And I know that that if I bring my child to this particular play group, this particular um, outdoor farm, that they're going to get overstimulated and they might have a tantrum. Now, that's my fear. But my vision with my child is I know my child loves animals as much as they sometimes get overstimulated by a lot of kids being around. And I know and I know for my child, and I know this viscerally, and I kind of seeing how they act around animals. I want my part of my vision with my child is that someday she will be able to participate in our area 4-H group. That's part of my vision, and I know my child loves it. I've seen how she is with animals. So if that's part of my vision, then I make decisions based on that vision. So if I want her to someday be part of 4-H, I know that she's got to go to these gatherings. She's got to get out there and be at those gatherings, even if it might mean the beginnings of a tantrum once in a while. It might mean a little awkward situation. I know she's got to get out there. So I come to that intentionally with all of the scaffolds and the supports I have in place. But by keeping my vision front and center, that pushes behind my fear. And I promise you, if we keep our child front and center, we can handle a little embarrassment, an awkward situation, a quizzical look, or whatever I might get, because I'm making decisions based on that shared vision or idea that I have with my child about where they might be going. Does that
Hmm.
make sense to you?
Yeah, I think the piece there is anytime you walk into a fear, just make sure you bring your arsenal or your quiver of coping strategies. If you
Exactly.
don't have those, I would say that exposure could be potentially destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're mindful about how you manage your own fears and how you might support your child's difficulties or discomfort, and you have those at your fingertips, then move into those situations because you have this vision. I think a lot of times parents don't think enough about those, about one, graduating exposures or how difficult something might be, or they go into it hoping for the best and they don't bring their strategies and scaffolds or what I would consider like coping strategies, stress management, into those moments, and then it fails. And so
Right.
that would be my only caveat. That's the only place I'd
Yes.
probably push back on you, Deb. And that is parents know what triggers your own anxieties and discomfort, know how
Mm-hmm.
to deal with those, because you're a co-regulator. So
Right.
ideally, you should be in a position of a better regulator than your kid.
Well, definitely. And too often we as parents are not. Yeah, and that's true. And thank you for that caveat, because what I have found is that just as many times as that scenario happens, when parents are intentional, sometimes things go better and one than they imagined. And their worst fears are not played out. And
Mm-hmm.
then they can offer, and you talked about gradual exposure and graduated guidance. Then they can offer yet another exposure, and that one goes a little better, and the next exposure goes better. And
Yeah.
sometimes we get we find allies in the most unexpected places. Here's an example. I was working with 3 young people at a water bottling plant, and I was job coaching there. And one of our guys who just loved it there, but could get dysregulated and have some very difficult behaviors, which could include some extreme behaviors, including biting and injury to other people. The student, the young man I was working with, Eddie, he started to escalate into those behaviors. And the manager of the company came by, and we were so afraid. Our fear, my fear as the teacher there, was escalated. And he came by, and and I thought, Eddie is showing the pre-behaviors that he's going to have some of this, have some severe behaviors that could cause harm to himself or others. And the head of the water bottling plant came by, literally hit him on, like tapped him on the top of his company ball cap and said, because Eddie was about ready to blow, he said, "Son, keep it together. We got work to do." And oddly, a natural consequence in the natural world that he did not receive in the segregated environment, he just went back, grabbed his bottle, and got back to work. So sometimes the world surprises us in ways we don't expect. And I have seen natural consequences in the environment. I've seen some of students I work with and people I've worked with behave differently because of the setting. So we never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Context plays a big role. Hey, Deb, let's move on to your next habit.
Absolutely.
Here. I'm going to share my screen. Maybe you can show your next habit here.
Absolutely. Let me do that. Easy for me to say. Just a second. There we go. Oops, went the wrong way. There we go. Okay. So yeah, and the next way that parents behave when they're raising their child to be capable is they lean into their child's natural curiosities, and they use them to build skills, but also to have fun. And this one maybe seems obvious, but not so. All our kids are curious. I mean, the fact is if you have any young kids, probably what you're doing is mopping spit off toys and all of the objects in the room, because kids are exploring the best way they can, and that's with their mouths. And kids are always touching, grabbing, and even if your child has limitations that don't allow him to touch and grab and bite and eat his or her environment, they are still taking in that environment with the senses they have, with their eyes. Kids are curious. So I think one of the things that often happens, or I guess I fell prey to, and I believe many other parents fall prey to as well, is that we're so busy trying to do the work of raising our kid with a disability that we forget to play into their natural curiosities, to allow that playfulness, and to just focus on having fun. I don't know. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think where this can get bumped into here, Deb, is when one of my clients has a specific curiosity or interest that the neuromajority might define as odd.
Yep.
that's where I see probably the barrier or the walls get put up.
Mhm.
It could be an example might be the evolution of elevators
Right.
throughout the 1900s,
Mhm.
or the difference between passenger trains and cargo trains, or the different variations of a 747. I mean, like, these are some, they're just like some right off the top of my head, right? And
Right.
the interest is so deep, and the curiosity is so deep and so thorough that I see parents want to pull that away, because what they're fearful of, going back to, you're going back to
Ideas.
fear, is
Mhm.
that now their kiddo that struggles to fit into the neuromajority is going to look even odder, and
Right.
that's going to be a real problem. And I just
Mhm.
find, like, that's not, talk about dignity and unfairness. That really moves us away from who this person really is and where they thrive and where they love to be.
Mhm.
And that I think that the tip there is you find their tribe. You get them
Right.
connected with other people who love elevators. You get them connected with other people who like to train spot. You get them connect, and they
Absolutely.
just find their people, and like a lot of happiness lives there. And
And
so,
there can be part of those. I mean, I talk about that too. Look at your
yeah,
child, natural proclivities, even their perceived idiosyncrasies can be leveraged. Like,
yeah.
for example, I worked with kids, a number of kids. One who was absolutely fascinated by natural disasters, and that's what he
Mhm.
wanted to spend all his time talking about. But I will tell you that even in those, you can find pieces of things that you can use, and maybe they can become assets. Couple examples. I worked with a girl who just loved um, the tactile feel of different fabrics, fuzzy fabrics, slick fabrics. She loved that feel. Now, that could be perceived by the neuromajority as a little different, right? A little weird if she was coming up to them and rubbing on their clothes. But we were able to allow her to pursue that curiosity and use it as actually a reinforcer and a job, and a career possibility for her, when we found her a way to work in a clothing company, unbagging and hanging up the clothes. And she was very proficient at that, and it allowed her to be around, feel those fabrics, the things she loved, but we were also able to work with her so that she kept doing her job, but was able to, to really be around and enjoy the things she loved. I also worked with other young people who loved water and water play, and we were able to find different matches for them that allowed them to work with and be around water. So I
Mhm.
think that it is a fine line, but I think sometimes we need to parse out what those interests are, because there could be pieces of those interests that could be used to build other skills and to move your kid forward in a lot of important ways. An
Agreed.
example
Yeah.
of a, a kid of a parent I interviewed, and this young man only wanted to do Legos. That's all he wanted to do was Legos, and he was amazing at Legos, but that's all he wanted to do. Well, his parents were able to leverage that interest to get him involved, to work on a whole, to kind of create a vehicle for a whole range of critical life skills. For example, she had him look online to identify the Lego sets he wanted. She gave him a budget, said, you only have this much money. He learned to make price lists. He learned the important self regulation skill of knocking things off the list if he had too much and it went over the amount that he had. He had to let go of something he wanted for something else until those calculations fit into his budget. They even were able to leverage that to get him to be motivated to work for money because he wanted money to buy the new sets. So I think that there's a whole, if we lean into our child's natural curiosities in really, really thoughtful, intentional, and compassionate ways, we can use those to kind of bring them down the road on other areas that we'd like them to improve their skills in, which will bring them into the neuromajority. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think interest should always drive curriculum. I've really
Mm-hmm.
never seen it to work any other way, actually, because we minimize distress and we minimize the need for attention, for sustaining attention, which are just heavy. They are heavy or big spenders from a cognitive resource
Oh
standpoint.
my God,
So, and using interest is always, I think I've never seen it go awry when you use an interest. The only time I see it go awry, and the only cautionary tale there I put in, is when someone uses an interest as a whip or a
right.
stick.
Uh-huh.
And that is not the same. That
Not
is
as a
not the
carrot,
same.
but
If you
not
don't
as
do
a
this, you
carrot.
can't have
Yeah.
access to that. And that's not
Yes.
what we're talking about. We're talking about using an interest to build skills or to scaffold other skills that they'll need from a life perspective. So I just want to
Right.
just say that we're not talking about using interest as reinforcement.
Right.
Right. So
I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
we're using interest. I think we're using interest as a way to get kids to engage in stuff that they might not otherwise want to
Mhm.
do, but they'll do it because they're interested. For example, and I have a couple examples with my own kid. He didn't want to move at all, but he had an interest in our banister, and and he had this. He was really profoundly interested in the banister. So I began to set him on the banister and take him up a little bit of the ways, maybe fives, pull him up, straddling the banister, maybe few inches, maybe a foot, and then I'd spotting him. Talk about supports. I'd let him slide down, and he loved that wee going down, and I was using that to get him to begin to use his core and his muscles to move up the banister, so he'd get that wee feeling of sliding down. And so
Mhm.
that was a natural interest that he had that got him to work on some critical areas that as a kid with severe low tone, he would have never, he didn't want to pursue those things in standard therapy sessions, but something about that banister, he was
Yeah.
willing to push himself a little. So I think that's where a natural curiosity
Yeah.
um, can be used in very positive ways. Like you said, never, I mean, Gwen, great point. Never as a stick, but
Yeah.
as a carrot.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something we just tend to miss because we're so desperate. We get really desperate to to make things happen. So, people will say, "Oh, that's my only leverage. So that's the only
Yes.
thing I can use."
That's all
So
I got. Yeah, that's
that's
all
all
I
I
got.
got. So I got to do that. And then all of a sudden now the one thing that person really loves is now, tarnished. And now we have no repertoire for pleasure. So but yeah, curiosity. And we would do this again. This is a thing we would do in parenting a neurotypical child. We'd pay attention and attune to what they're interested in, and we would give them opportunities to
Right.
be involved in those interests. We do that. There's no reason why we shouldn't also do that for any other person that's wired differently. So I love
So,
that. I love
so
that.
my question is, yeah, my question, Gwen, is we do that with our neurotypical kids all the time, but I find that a lot of folks I work with, and I fell into this category myself when my son was very young, of hyper focusing on limitations.
Yeah.
And I think when we hyper focus on limitations, we are not paying attention. You said, oh, you said earlier, and I think it was well said, that I've never seen anything go well unless it focuses on interests. But I'll tell you, there are plenty of times with our kids who have disabilities where we are not focusing on interests. We are hyper focused on
Yep.
limitations. We're
Yep.
hyper focused on pursuing what we think our child should do,
Yep.
not what they enjoy doing. So I don't think it goes without saying, because yeah, it's sort of like a no-brainer, except when we get caught up in another fear-based idea that, oh my gosh, there's so much wrong with my kid. There's so much he has to work on that I can only focus on those limitations.
Yep.
When there's
It's so
also a
true.
lot of good going on.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right, Deb, let's do the next. Love this
sure.
next one.
Yes. Next and final. Let me just, okay. So this one is sort of, it's my mantra, and I can't say enough about this. And maybe again, it may appear simplistic, but I think it's also in that same way, it's also profound. Use words and act in ways that send your child the message that you think they're capable. You know, intention is the most powerful tool at our disposal as parents. I mean, what we believe, what we think, what we hope, and I'll have to take us back to some quintessential old psychological research, and I'm sure you can build on this in so many ways, Gwen. But you know, a lot of us, maybe many parents aren't familiar with the old research from 1964 of Rosenthal and Fode that's been re-upped and validated so many times since then, which is, you know, it has to do with research assistants in rats. And this particularly dedicated group of research assistants were each given a rat. And all of them were told something about their rat. And half of them were told that their rat was a particularly bright rat, that they had a special rat and their rat was really smart. And the other half of the class of the research assistants were told, you have a dumb rat. You know, your rat is really inferior. And the researchers watched those graduate students very carefully. And it turned out that the research assistants who had a rat, who had been told that their rat was bright, that those rats ended up winning, #winning at life, at all rat things, like things that are important if you're a rat, like being able to get through a maze to get food. All the things you have to be good at to be a rat, those rats did well at. And those rats that the research assistants had that were told that they were dumb rats performed much less well. Well, when they went back and looked, turned out that the behavior of the closest caregivers to those rats had a big part in that change, because the research assistants who thought they had a smart rat talked to their rat more, talked to their rat in encouraging terms, hand-fed their rat, cuddled their rat, nurtured their rat, petted their rat, and would take the time to really give them a piece of food at a time, really spend a lot of time with the rats. And those folks that were told they had a dumb rat spent much less time with their rats, gave them much less attention, much less positive commentary. So we have to say, well, what does the behavior of rats have to do with children? Well, the fact is what we say and what we do in front of our children affects what we believe about our child. What we believe, let's take it back. What we believe, if we believe our child can, we talk to our child differently. We say different things. We behave differently. We offer them different things. We use different inflections than if we believe our child can't. And so it's very important, just the kinds of words and messages that we send our child over the course of a lifetime matters. And it's not only
Mm.
what we say and do, but it's also what we don't say and what we don't do that matters. So I spend a lot of time with parents having them keep a journal of the kinds of things they say in front of their children, and the things they do in front of their children. Um, and it's interesting because a lot of us think we're sending encouraging messages when maybe we aren't. So I'll pause there and let you weigh in, and then we can talk more about it.
Wow. I mean, it's like so powerful, this idea of meta communication, what we would consider meta communication, or how we act, or the messages we send without saying the actual
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? And it brings me, it reminds me of being authentic and genuine, with our intentions, and being clear about what we believe, and that we're acting in that way, to demonstrate that. I love this idea of, it kind of goes back full circle, Deb, to, we're talking about, parents being the biggest influencers, with all that, all the little interactions that glue life together, and it reminds me of this. It's what we say and do, and what do we not say and do. And um it's really powerful. And I think the difficult thing about this is it's, not an immediate reaction. Like, I think about the difference between a short term and a long term goal, or an immediate gratification and a long term goal. So much of what we do as parents is a long term commitment, and we don't really see that change, because it's like a compounding interest situation. We don't see the benefits of that till years, decades later, sometimes. And so, we don't realize the immediate impact of something per se.
Yeah, and
Um,
I want to
Really
say a word about
powerful.
this. I'm really aware because one of the things we talk about with the habits is look, you know, knowing what these habits are shouldn't make you afraid. They should make you empowered, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh my gosh, I got to be careful about everything I say. Certainly, it's not, as you point out, it's each little action or reaction is not going to make it or break it for your child, but it's a pattern of behavior over a lifetime. I was in a meeting with a student of mine, and the mom was really spending a lot of time telling me how uncomfortable her child is, with computers, and how he's not good with computers, and he's just not he just isn't good with it, technology, and it really makes him nervous, and he really doesn't like technology. And her sixth grader was sitting right there, and if he wasn't uncomfortable with technology before, I'm pretty sure he was after that. So we have to
Mm.
be aware of what we're saying on behalf of our child, in front of our child. I also work with a lot of parents of kids, on the spectrum, and this one parent I talked to in particular said, one of the things, she's a great kid, she's a great mom, but she said if there's one thing she would have done differently is she talked about her son in front of him a lot, because she really thought he wasn't listening. He was very involved in what he was doing, and and over time she realized he was hearing everything I was saying. He was taking all that in. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think this habit is 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 literally the bedrock. If we treat our child as capable, if we communicate to our child, oh, I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in your effort. If you're communicating that way, um, you know, there's a chance our kids still aren't going to get there, but they're going to end up in a better place than if we've communicated, yeah, I can't do that. That's too, I mean, there's so many examples. Take a neurotypical one. A couple of my kids, who would be described as, who are described as neurotypical, they wanted to go somewhere on their bikes, and my husband said to them, oh, you can't go there. That's way too far. And they didn't think it was way too far until he said it was way too far. after that, they wouldn't take that trip again. So I think we plant suggestion as the most influential people in our child's life. And I think you, Gwen, so articulately and so beautifully remind us that we can't let our kids fall off a cliff. We can't allow our kids to just hang out to dry in the wind. I think you remind us of that so, so well. And I also want to remind us that, even while we're not doing that, it's okay to err on the side of saying, hey, I think you got this. I think you got this. Because we're still going to come in with our supports. And they come in thinking the person who I think the most of in the world thinks I can do it. And I think there's a lot of examples in my book, Capable, about that, of where my son was going to do some landscaping, and I had some serious fears about the physicality of it, his medical issues, his tone issues. However, I said, "Yeah, I think you got this." And we had other things in the background ready to jump in if he needed it, but he heard, "Hey, they think I can do this," and that affected his belief about whether or not he thought he could do it, and he entered into it in a different way than he would have otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's why I think this one is just it's I think it's most important.
Yeah, it's really great. And I think it requires a degree of self-awareness and self-knowledge on a parent's part, as well as their understanding of their kiddo. You got to have both of those as well to really live this one in a very honest way. And, and maybe the other the and to this, not the but statement, but the and to this statement is, I believe you're capable, and support will be here,
right,
if needed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's an and. It's not an all or nothing. You haven't failed, or I believe that you're going to make the best decision you can, and I know you'll make mistakes, and the support will be there. Like it.
Yeah.
Right. They're and statements. But they do go a long way. And I think sometimes when someone believes in us, when we don't believe in ourselves, that sometimes we can hang on to that to just kind of make it through, to help us with a stretch, not a drop. Right.
Yeah. And that's why all these habits work together, because you're not going to go in and say, hey, you got this, I'll see you next week. That's not going to be it. But the message is, and there's another habit down the line we'll get at, which has to do with celebrating your child's effort to build a narrative of strength. Pointing out that it's not about getting it right every time, but it's about hanging in there. And so it's not like we're going to get it right. None of us are going to get it right, but you're a strong person. I've seen you hang in there. I've seen you stick with stuff. I've seen you persevere. And I think those are strong assets we want to build into our kids who are neurodiverse, just like we do our kids who are neurotypical. And I think it's maybe easier for us to do with our neurotypical kids, but we need to pay just as much attention to that with our kids who, don't fall right in line with the prototypical kid model.
Yeah. Awesome. Deb, thank you so much for coming on and sharing these habits. And I hope you'll come on and share the rest of them. We'll just, address them. It's fun to do some of these deep dives into each habit and give people a way to understand it and promote just an ounce or a shift or a pivot or anything in your thinking. The way we think about something can really have trickle down kind of ripple effects on what we do and how we do things. So thank you for coming on. I will leave all the ways to get in touch with you, ways to get capable, ways to join your community. I'll leave that all in the description below. And if you're listening to this through your ears, I'll do the same in the show notes. But Deb, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. I think as this is our passion, we can, spend time on these all day long. And I just love the opportunity to kind of push our thinking and kind of get stuff out there in the world that, how do we know, may make a difference for someone somewhere. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Deb.
Okay. See ya.